I do have to say that one of the best things about working with Science on Stage is that you get to work with lovely people. We've got Renata that I've worked with over the last 2 years from Slovenia, and Dagmar, who has already done the German version of this. So we met quite a lot. We've been meeting quite a lot over the last couple of years. And a lot of our things have made it onto the website, but we have tried and tested a lot of these activities. We've decided that ours is an apple a day keeps the climate okay, because we've been working with younger children from the ages of 3, 4, 5, 6 years and upwards. And we wanted a project where everybody could take part in it. And so we've got some of the resources here for you. It was actually Dagmar's idea, and she held up an apple, and I thought, yes, that is something that our young children in our school can recognize. They know what it is, but what do they actually know about it? We found out that they are grown in lots of different countries. We know that we can grow apples locally, but a lot of the apples that we eat come from Europe or come from sort of like further afield, South America, New Zealand. We know that apples can be stored when they're harvested, because they're usually harvested once a year. But how are they stored? If we wanted to store them, what would be the best way of doing it? We wanted it to be very practical for the children. We also, well, in the UK, our children get free apples. Every day they get free fruit to eat. So we know that they're relatively cheap. And actually, we've got quite a lot of them that we can do some scientific investigations with. And oh my goodness, there are so many different varieties. We were just talking about how some of them have brand names. We often laugh about the Pink Lady advert, the Pink Lady apples being the ones that the children want to eat more of, but they're also very expensive. That's not their original name, and they come from a long way off. And Dagmar, particularly, if you want to look at it, looked into the organic growing and the commercially grown apples to see whether there was any difference in them. And we found that this covered some of the sustainable development goals. And we didn't want to fit too many in because we wanted the children to be able to recognize them and become familiar with them. So, number 2, zero hunger. We honestly think that if more apples were grown locally and eaten locally by people, then actually it would help. I know that in England we have community orchards where anybody can go and pick the apples off the trees. They're not always eating apples, but actually people can go. And if they want to store them, they can store them and they can last for a couple of months. We know that apples are healthy for us. We know that it contributes to sort of like our good health. Well, growing trees, and one of the things that we did with the community is we grew some fruit trees. Obviously, they're not going to be ready for about 4 or 5 years before they start having lots of fruit on there. But being outside, planting a tree, the children are so excited about it. And hopefully some of the younger children, by the time they leave our school after 5 years, there will be apples for them to eat on there. And being outside is just so important, and anything we can do to get people and children particularly outside does contribute to their well-being. Then Dagmar particularly looked at the responsible consumption of these apples and the production of apples. And she looked at the air miles, which you can look at in primary school as well with the younger children. How far have they actually travelled? And Life on Land, number 15, it obviously does that. And that's what I'm going to start with, the hook. We're not going to have time to go through all the lessons, but we like this because it draws children in, and we think it's something that adults would find interesting as well. And some of you may have heard of it. It's called If the World Were an Apple. So I've got an apple here, and we're trying to imagine that that is the whole world. If we cut it into 4 equal pieces, I've got 4 equal pieces here, and I've got 3 pieces now. So 3/4 of this apple will represent all of the water and the liquid that covers the earth. So I don't know how many of you know all the percentages, but something like 70% of our earth is covered by our oceans, which are salty water. Well, 75% is covered by water, which includes the rivers and the oceans and the snow. So only 1/4 of our apple, and I've already cut it up here, is the land. Now, what you have to do is, because you've now got that quarter, and I'm reading it, but there is a PowerPoint that you can go through, you have to cut that quarter into halves. So you've got 2/8. And one of these 8s is the deserts, the mountains, the land which cannot be used to grow things on. So we have got just 1/8 of it now. And this is where it does get tricky, which is why I've cut it previously. That other 1/8, we have to cut that into 4 pieces. So now we have got 1 out of 32 pieces, right? And 3 out of the 32, it's too wet to grow anything in the soil. It's too cold. It's too rocky. There are houses there. There are cities over it. So we are left with 1 out of 32. So a little tiny slither. And if you are very careful, you can take the top bit of the peel off. So now, and I'm going to look at my plate, we have got this tiny, tiny piece. And the soil, which can be used to grow our food, is only 5 foot deep, about 1.5 meters deep. So actually it would be a lot thinner than this. So we haven't got a lot of land on which we can grow food to feed a growing population. And we think that this is a good way of getting children to realise that the land that we have got, that we can grow things, we need to be really careful about what we plant. And we do think that apples is a really good thing for people to grow, whether it's in their back gardens, whether it's in their parks. And we are hoping that there is going to be this community thing coming together to say, well, if we're planting trees, let's plant trees where we can eat the fruit of it. Obviously, we would like apple trees, but there are lots of other trees that we can grow. And then we've just picked out just a couple of the activities. So once we've got the children and everybody hooked, in the UK, we have different inquiry types. So I've made sure that they fit with how we do our inquiry and what we do with our children when they are sort of like 3-4 years old up to what they're 11 years till they're 11 years old. So observation is really important. Tasting the apples using all your senses. And so you can buy a variety of apples. So we have got 2 different worksheets here. And when I say worksheets, it's so that the children can put their own information. We've done them as Word documents, so you can change things if you want. So one of them, you just have 3 different samples of apples and you answer the questions about it. On the other one, there might be more apples, but you want to put the apples that you can buy in your local supermarket or at your local farm shop, and you can rank them, which is a big thing in the UK. Can you put them from the tastiest to the one that you don't like? Can you put the one from the greenest to the reddest one? So ranking them into sort of like what you think is very subjective, but it's also good for the children to look at them. And one of our things that we'd like the children to do is to do a bit of research about the different types of apples and where do they come from. So some of the apples might have been grown in the orchard just down the road, whereas some of them would have come from the other side of the earth. Right? For us, New Zealand, South America, a lot of the apples come. So we looked at the price of them. We looked at how far they had travelled so that they could start then understanding about food miles. And we made sure that, yes, they liked some of them, and we made sure sort of like that they tasted all of them. And I even got to the point where I was blindfolding children because I think that they were just saying that they liked Pink Lady apples because they saw all their friends did, but actually I think you can taste the difference in it. But then we have to have a look at the price of the Pink Lady apples, which were 5 times more expensive than some of the locally grown ones. But these are the conversations that you can have with your children, and you can start talking to them about it. So these are some of the things that we found when we did our research on them. And then one of the other inquiries that we do in primary is we identify them, we sort them, and we begin to classify them. So we go from Venn diagrams, where we've got the circles that interconnect, to can the children come up with a yes, no question, which they always start off with 4 apples to begin with. And then, is it red? So all the ones that are red, yes. All the ones that are not red, no, go on that side. Then they've got another question. Does it have a thin skin? Because some of them were thicker than others, right? Yes, no. And then, is it from New Zealand? So this is where their research came in so that they were able to do it. Now, some of the children would have needed support to do that, but our aim is by the time the children leave, when they're 10, 11 years old, they should be able to create one of these databases independently. But there are lots of other things that you can do with them as well. You can put them in order from the ones which have traveled the furthest to the ones that have the most local. So again, the children are beginning to look at that. One of the things that we did was, because we chopped them all up and the children were eating them, they were noticing sort of like, oh, well, some of them have got bruises on, and sort of like, how have they been stored? So we came up with the fact that we wanted to do some comparative testing, and we wanted to see whether it mattered the material that the apple was wrapped in. And from this picture, you can see sort of like the one that was in the aluminium foil, that did decay quicker. But there are limits. It's the same with a lot of science. We only did it in our school. We only did it with a few apples. Could it be our sample size was not reliable? So we're open for other schools and for other classes to try it to see whether they come up with the same results as us. Because in there, the ones with the brown paper did seem to store better than the ones that had nothing at all. So whether the brown paper affected it, we think it might have done. But again, it's that discussion that you have. Well, we only did it with a few apples. Is it reliable? Is our data, our information reliable? And we did that for the apples. This was one thing that both me and Renata did the same. Well, we did about apples browning, but we did it in very different ways in our schools. So the children noticed that when you slice apples, that sometimes some varieties go brown. And of course, that means that people don't want to eat them so much. So was there a way that once they were cut, we could prevent it from going brown? And I went very much with sort of like the children's suggestions. And I know Renata went very much with a proper fair test about how to do it. So we had more a comparative test where we had 2 pieces of apple from the same type of apple, and one of them we just left, and one of them the children could do something with it. So they could put it in lemon juice, they could put it in water, they could put it in milk for some reason, somebody suggested. To see whether that would actually slow down the process of it going brown. And then it was very much an observation thing, where they could see the differences and they could explain which one they thought was better, because then we could have a class discussion on it. And I put there about our post-it note planning, because if you haven't come across post-it note planning, it's a really good way to get your students to be independent in thinking of a question, keeping the variables the same, but only changing one variable, and then how they're going to measure it. But I think that would be a whole another session on post-it note planning.
Another project.
It is good to do. and it does help the children be very independent in their science investigations. And I think then, do I hand over to Renata?
I'm going to present how can we use apple yeast or apple vinegar, and to consider the sustainable development goals. We prepared the apple yeast and the apple vinegar by ourselves. So besides this SDGs, this activity, Apple usage, also have other main topics, that is scientific investigation, critical thinking, fermentation, and consumer education. So during the COVID, there was a shortage of yeast in the supermarket, and people on social media post a lot of different recipes how to make the yeast without buying yeast in the supermarket. Then we use one of these solutions, and we make a pizza. So the recipe was good, but the pizza wasn't as good as if we make it with the normal yeast. So then we ask, are all the articles in the internet always right? So here you can develop the critical thinking and how to prove that the article is right or not. So we decided to do a scientific investigation. So in this investigation, we form the questions, we write the hypothesis, do the experiment, then write the results, and also discuss about the investigation. So the question was, does the mixture rise if we don't add an apple? So it's really necessary to add an apple to get yeast. So if we want to stress on the independent or on dependent and independent variables, so we can also form different questions like how an apple affect on the height of the mixture. Then we make the hypothesis in our worksheets. You can find this worksheet also with a yellow square. If students learn about fermentation before, they will be able to form the hypothesis. But if they didn't, so they can read about the fermentation in this yellow square and then form the hypothesis. You also can form then the groups for the investigation. So all the groups will have all the ingredients that are in the recipe, but if some of the group thinks that it's not the apple who will affect on the height of the mixture, if this is the temperature or the sugar or the water, so they will make another investigation. So all the groups have the first, and then the group 1 without apple, the group 2 without temperature, but it depends what the students think. So then they make the investigation, and then they also write the results. They write the results as in a table, or they make a graph. And when we do this, so that is easy to measure the height of the mixture, we use the rubber bands. And this also very important that we use different colors. So the first day maybe the yellow, here was the first day was the red, then the second the yellow, the third day the green one. So it is easier to measure the height. And then at the end there is also the discussion. Here you can see the result. The first one is with all the ingredients, then the second is with no apple, and the last one is without sugar. So we deny the hypothesis, so we don't need the apple to make yeast or apple yeast or to make a pizza, but we learn about the fermentation and we get new ideas. And the new idea was like how to prepare a sour dough, which was also very popular in these COVID days in Slovenia. But at the end, then you can learn about fermentation and about the investigation, to look the H5P videos that are included in our in this website. And with the click on these circles, purple circles with the hand, you get different questions. So here is one question, for example, fill the banks. It is about the fermentation. So the gas inside the bubbles is like the CO2 and the other product is alcohol. So the questions are different. It can be also the question like true or false, and also the multiple choices so that you choose the right answer. So then is the next one is the apple vinegar. So the apple vinegar, you can also do the investigation. Maybe you can use the different fruits, or you find something else. It depends what your students want to know. But in this part, we also learn about the fermentation, and maybe the other topic that I also mentioned with the apple vinegar was also the consumer education. So in this part, at first we make a vinegar, and then at the end we also make a label for the vinegar. So with this, we want to use. We want to learn, or we want to educate our kids that they will be informed consumers. So they make their own labels for the vinegar, and with this they also learn about. They will be able to read also the other labels of other products. For example, that they that they know the difference between the name of the product and the trademark, and that they know the other the label of quality, what are the meaning of them, and so on. Thank you for your listening and the questions.